In the scorching summer of 1868, when the dust hid more than just footprints and justice often yielded to gunpowder, a dry wind carried whispers of change across the Rio Pecos plains. Eli Turner didn't yet know that this July night would forever transform his quiet land into a fragile bridge between two worlds. The sun sank behind the hills like a gold coin dropped into a deep well, staining the endless horizon blood red. Eli Turner stopped beside the horse fence, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his calloused hand. At 40, his face bore the scars of a war he'd chosen to forget, and in his heart, a loneliness the land couldn't fill. His farm stretched out like an island of peace amidst the chaos of the Wild West. White fences marked off the wheat fields, but Eli had never fenced off the ancient paths that crossed his property. Those were sacred trails, worn by generations of Comanche and Kiowa who had walked that land long before the first settlers arrived. Respecting the past was one of the few certainties he had left after years of blood and gunpowder. "Eli, supper's ready." Mabel's clear voice broke the evening's silence. His younger sister, just turned 16, appeared on the porch with a flour-dusted apron and a smile that still held the scent of innocence. She was the only family he had left in the world, the only reason he'd hung up his gun and picked up a plow. "Be right there, little one." He smiled at her, feeling the night wind starting to blow down from the mountains, carrying the smell of wild sage and something else he couldn't quite identify. As he headed towards the house, a faint sound made him stop. A muffled groan came from the barn. Eli stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon he no longer carried. The night wind seemed to hold its breath, as if nature itself sensed that something was about to change. With cautious steps, he approached the barn, slowly pushing open the wooden door that creaked on rusty hinges. Faint moonlight filtered through the gaps in the planks, creating streaks of silver on the piled hay. And there, huddled behind a bale of hay, was a boy. He was young, perhaps 17, with long black hair and the bronze skin common to the Plains tribes. An arrow pierced his left side and blood had stained his leather garments, decorated with symbols Eli recognized. Comanche. And not just any Comanche, judging by the elaborate embroidery on his tunic. The boy opened his eyes, two dark pools filled with pain and fear. He whispered something in his own language, then switched to broken English. "Please, don't kill me." Eli knelt beside him, feeling the wind entering the barn and making the straw strands dance. "I won't hurt you, boy. What's your name?" "Taki," the young man murmured, trying to rise but immediately falling back. "Son of Big Crow." Eli's heart skipped a beat. Big Crow was the chief of the Southern Plains Comanche, a legendary warrior feared and respected for miles around. And his son was here, wounded and vulnerable in his barn. "What happened to you?" Eli asked, already knowing the answer would complicate his life more than he could imagine. "Kiowa territory," Taki whispered, closing his eyes in pain. "I was on hunting training. I didn't see the borders. They found me." Eli looked at the arrow protruding from the boy's side. A Kiowa arrow, no doubt. The young man had crossed enemy territory and paid the price. But how had he made it all the way to his farm? The ancient trails. Taki murmured, as if he'd read his thoughts. "My grandfather taught me. The secret paths among the hills. I saw your light. I felt peace here." The night wind blew harder, making the barn walls shake. Eli knew that protecting Big Crow's son could mean war, not just with the Kiowa, but with the local settlers too. But as he looked into those young eyes full of pain, he felt he had no choice. "Mabel," he called towards the house. "Bring hot water and bandages. Quick." That night, under the wind that whispered prophecies through the tree branches, Eli Turner didn't yet know that he was about to embark on a journey that would forever change the fate of two worlds. Mabel arrived in a hurry with a basin of steaming water and clean rags, her blonde hair loose over her shoulders and her eyes wide with curiosity mixed with worry. When she saw Taki lying on the hay, she stopped short. "Is he badly hurt?" she whispered, approaching cautiously but without fear. "The arrow has to come out," Eli replied, examining the wound. "But first we need to clean it all up." He looked his sister in the eyes. "Mabel, what happens here tonight can't be known by anyone. Understand?" She nodded solemnly. then knelt beside the Indian boy. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Taki," the young man murmured, surprised by the gentleness in her voice. "I'm Mabel." "We won't hurt you." Eli poured whiskey over the knife blade, then looked at Taki. "This is gonna hurt, boy. Bite down on this." He offered him a piece of leather. Extracting the arrow was a moment of pure torment. Taki clenched his teeth on the leather, his muscles taut as violin strings, while the night wind seemed to groan with him through the barn's cracks. When the bloody tip finally came out, the boy passed out. "Good," Eli murmured, cleaning the wound with whiskey. "At least he won't feel it when I burn the flesh to stop the bleeding." Mabel held Taki's head on her knees, stroking his black hair like she had with injured pups she found in the fields. "Why are we helping him?" she asked softly. "The neighbors say the Indians are dangerous." "Neighbors say a lot of things," Eli retorted, pressing a warm cloth to the cauterized wound. "But this is just a wounded boy, Mabel. And in our home, the wounded are cared for." They made Taki comfortable on a pile of clean blankets in the most sheltered corner of the barn. The young Comanche slept deeply, his breathing finally steady. The wind had stopped blowing, leaving a silence thick with anticipation. "What happens when he wakes up?" Mabel asked, sitting beside the sleeping boy. "I don't know," Eli admitted, "but I've got a feeling our quiet life is about to end." They spent the night taking turns on watch. Every now and then, Taki raved, speaking in his native tongue words that sounded like invocations or prayers. At dawn, when the first rays of sun filtered through the barn planks, he finally opened his eyes, now clear and alert. "Still alive," he mumbled, disbelieving. "And you'll stay that way," Eli said, offering him a mug of warm broth. "How do you feel?" Taki tried to sit up, grimacing in pain. "Better, much better." He looked at Eli, then Mabel. "Why did you help me? Your kind usually shoots first and asks questions later." "We ain't like the others," Mabel replied simply. The young Comanche sipped the broth slowly, studying the two siblings with sharp eyes. "My father always said there were men of honor even among the white folk, but I'd never met one." "Your father's a wise man," Eli said. "And speaking of your father, I reckon we ought to send for him. He'll be worrying about you." Taki's eyes suddenly grew anxious. "No, you can't. If Big Crow comes here with warriors, the settlers will think you're plotting against them. That'll only bring you trouble." But as he spoke, all three heard something that made their blood run cold. The dull thunder of hooves approaching. Many horses. And the morning wind carried the jingle of weapons and metal ornaments. "Too late," Taki whispered, paling. "They're already here." The rising sun was eclipsed by a dust cloud rising on the horizon like a sandstorm. Eli stepped out of the barn and saw what he'd feared. 77 mounted Comanche warriors were arranging themselves in a circle around the farm, lances pointed skyward, faces painted for war. "Mabel, stay in the barn with Taki," he ordered without turning. "And whatever happens, don't come out." "Eli, trust me." The morning wind carried the acrid smell of horse sweat and the metallic jingle of ornaments that tinkled like funeral bells. At the center of the formation, on a magnificent pinto stallion, advanced a man who seemed carved from mountain rock. Big Crow had his gray hair braided with eagle feathers, his face marked by war scars, and eyes black as a moonless night. He stopped 10 paces from Eli, and for long moments the two men stared at each other in silence. The Comanche chief had an aura of power that made the earth tremble beneath his horse's hooves. "White man," Big Crow finally said in perfect English, "the plains wind has brought me the scent of my son's blood. Is he here?" Eli slowly raised his hands, showing them empty. "He's here. He's alive. He's safe. Bring him to me. First, let me explain." "Bring him!" The chief's cry echoed through the valley, making the horses start and a flock of crows rise. Eli nodded and headed towards the barn. Inside, Taki was getting to his feet with Mabel's help, his face contorted with pain, but resolute. "My father is angry," the boy said. "I can hear it in his voice." "Can you walk?" Eli asked. "I have to." They came out of the barn together, Taki leaning on Eli's shoulder. When Big Crow saw his son wounded but alive, Something shifted in his expression. Anger mixed with relief, and the tension in his shoulders eased imperceptibly. "Father," Taki said in Comanche, then switched to English so Eli could understand. "This man saved my life. He and his sister cared for me as if I were their brother." Big Crow dismounted and approached slowly. His warriors remained still as statues, but Eli could feel their electric tension in the air. "Tell me," the chief ordered his son. Taki recounted his capture in Kiowa territory, his escape along the ancient trails, his arrival at the barn, and the care he received. He spoke of Mabel's kindness, Eli's courage, the whiskey used to clean his wounds, and the warm blankets. When he finished, Big Crow looked at Eli with different eyes. "Why did you risk your life for my son?" "Because he was hurt," Eli replied simply. "And in my home, the injured are cared for." The wind blew harder, making the prairie grass sway like waves on a green sea. Big Crow did something no one expected. He approached Eli and placed a calloused hand on his shoulder. "The trails that cross your land are ancient," he said slowly. "They have been walked by my ancestors' feet for generations. You have respected them. Now I respect you." He raised his voice so all the warriors could hear. "This man will be called Brother of Honor. His land is neutral territory. Whoever touches him or his kin touches me." The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the wind carried away the dust of tension, leaving behind something no one had dared to hope for, the possibility of peace. In the days that followed, Eli's farm transformed into something extraordinary, a place where two worlds touched without colliding. Comanche warriors traversed the ancient trails with respectful steps, some stopping to trade furs for flour and sugar. Mabel watched everything with growing curiosity. One morning, while hanging laundry in the warm wind, she saw Taki sitting in the shade of the big oak. The boy was braiding wild grasses, creating a circular wreath that shone in the sun. "What's that?" she asked, approaching. "A dream catcher," Taki replied, looking up at her. "It's for you. When I was wounded and delirious, you held my head on your knees like my mother did. Bad dreams will run away." Mabel delicately took the woven object, feeling the small white feathers tucked into the center. "It's beautiful, but I don't know if it's right." The neighbors— "What's wrong?" Eli asked, approaching. "Silas Brewster came by yesterday. Folks are talking. Say we're betraying our race." Eli's face hardened. Silas was the nearest neighbor, a former bounty hunter who had lost his brother in an Indian raid. Since then, his heart had turned hard as rock. "Silas can mind his own business," he said in a firm voice. Taki slowly stood. "Maybe I should leave. I don't want to bring you trouble." "You stay as long as you want," Eli retorted. "This is neutral ground." The afternoon wind carried the sound of hooves. 3 white riders were headed towards the farm, Silas Brewster in the lead, followed by Tom Fletcher and Jake Morrison. "Eli," Silas yelled, dismounting, his face red from sun and anger. "We need to talk. This ain't right for you to do alone. Comanche's coming and going, the trading, all this friendliness when it's putting the families around here in danger." "How?" Eli asked quietly. "What happens when the Kiowa come for revenge? Or when the Comanche decide they want more? What happens to our wives and children?" The wind picked up, swinging the dream catcher in Mabel's hands. Taki remained silent, tense. "What happens," Eli said slowly, "is that for the first time in years, nobody's shooting at anybody in this valley. If that don't suit you, Silas, you're free to move on." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Eli Turner. Folks' patience has a limit." He mounted his horse and rode off with his companions, leaving a cloud of dust and silent threats. The wind carried their voices away, but not the tension they had sown. Weeks slipped by like sand through fingers, bringing an unexpected routine. Every morning, Taki helped Eli with farm chores, learning to mend fences and tend to horses. His wound had healed well, leaving only a crescent-shaped scar he wore like a badge of honor. "In my tribe," he recounted one afternoon as they stacked hay, "a scar always tells a story. This one speaks of friendship found in the dark." Mabel, who was sewing on the porch, looked up from the dream catcher she kept hanging beside the window. "And in our culture, we say scars are God's way of reminding us of His grace." "Your God and our spirits, perhaps they ain't so different," Taki mused. But not everything was serene. The plains wind carried worrying whispers from Comanche territory. A group of elders had begun murmuring doubts about Big Crow's decision. They claimed that declaring a white man's land neutral territory weakened the tribe's authority. In the evening, as shadows lengthened and the night wind began to blow, Taki shared stories of his people with Eli and Mabel. He told of Yotaka, an ambitious young warrior who saw peace as a sign of weakness. "Yotaka thinks my father is getting old," he said one evening, staring at the stars. "He thinks the prophecy of the white man who will open the land of reconciliation is just old folks' superstition." "What prophecy?" Mabel asked, intrigued. Taki hesitated, then spoke slowly. "An ancient legend says that one day a white man will respect our sacred trails and open his land to all peoples. My father believes you, Eli, are that man." Eli shifted uncomfortably. "I ain't no prophet, boy. I'm just a farmer trying to live in peace." "Maybe that's what makes the prophecy true," Taki murmured. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Big Crow arrived with only 3 warriors, a sign it was a peaceful visit, but his face was grim as storm clouds. "Brother of honor," he said, dismounting, "I need to speak with you." They sat in the shade of the big oak, while the wind rustled the leaves above their heads. Big Crow spoke of the divisions within the tribe, of the young warriors who saw peace as betrayal. "Some of my men want to test this friendship," he said heavily. "Yotaka proposed arranging a trade with the Kiowa here on your land. He says if this place is truly neutral, even our enemies should be welcome." Eli felt a cold shiver despite the heat. "And what do you think of that?" "I think it's a trap," Big Crow admitted. "But I cannot refuse without appearing weak. If I accept and something goes wrong, the blame will fall on you. If I refuse, the young ones will say I am afraid." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain from the distant mountains. Eli looked towards the house where Mabel and Taki were preparing lunch, unaware of the storm gathering. "When?" he simply asked. 3 days from now, at sundown." Eli nodded slowly. "Then we'll be ready." But as he spoke those words, he knew nothing could truly prepare them for what was about to happen. The wind carried his words away to the endless plains, where other troubles were brewing in the shadows. The 3 days passed like lightning flashes in the summer sky. Eli worked with frenzied nervousness, checking every detail of the farm while the wind carried the rising tension from the surrounding plains. Mabel had noticed the change in her brother's behavior, and Taki's, who had become quiet and thoughtful. "Something's not right," she said while preparing supper, the dream catcher swaying gently at the window. "You two are hiding something." Eli exchanged a look with Taki, then sighed. "Tomorrow night there's going to be a meeting here, Comanche and Kiowa together." Mabel's eyes widened. "Enemy tribes? Here? It's a test," Taki explained bitterly. "Yotaka wants to prove my father's peace is a dangerous illusion." "And what if he's right?" Mabel asked softly. Neither man answered, but the silence was as eloquent as words. The fateful day arrived with a strangely calm sky. The wind was almost absent, as if nature itself held its breath. At sundown, the first riders appeared on the horizon. 20 Comanche warriors led by Yotaka, a tall, muscular man with ritual scars on his chest and eyes hard as flint. "So this is the famous neutral territory," he said, dismounting, his voice heavy with sarcasm. "Looks like a regular farm to me." "Yotaka," Taki greeted him with forced respect. "Where are the Kiowa?" "They'll come," the warrior replied, studying Eli with ill-concealed contempt. "I sent a message to their war chief, Lone Wolf. If this place is truly neutral as your father claims, he should come without fear." Eli's stomach tightened. Lone Wolf was famous for his ferocity and his hatred of white men. If Yotaka had truly invited him, the intention was clearly provocative. As they waited, the Comanche warriors arranged themselves in a semicircle around the house. Some stuck lances into the ground, others checked their weapons. The atmosphere was electric, charged with suppressed tension. "Brother," Mabel whispered to Eli, "I'm scared." "Me too," he admitted, "but it's too late to turn back now." The sun was already touching the horizon when a second dust cloud appeared from the east. 15 Kiowa warriors rode towards the farm, led by a scarred-faced man with cruel eyes, Lone Wolf. He stopped 50 paces from the Comanche, and for long moments the two factions stared at each other in deadly silence. The wind finally returned, carrying the dust and tension of years of tribal warfare. "Comanche," Lone Wolf spat. "Have you come to die?" "Kiowa," Yotaka retorted, rising to his feet. "Have you come to run?" Eli stepped forward, raising his hands. "Enough. This is neutral ground, no fighting here." Lone Wolf laughed bitterly. "Neutral ground? You're just a white farmer playing chief. You've got no authority over us." But before anyone could answer, Taki moved. He walked slowly to the center of the space between the two factions, unarmed and vulnerable. "I am Taki, son of Big Crow," he said in a strong voice. "This man saved my life when I was wounded and alone. His home is as sacred to me as it is to my father." The wind blew harder, whipping the feathers in the warrior's hair and carrying the smell of the approaching storm. Taki's courage in placing himself between the two enemy factions created a moment of surreal silence. The young Comanche stood there unarmed, with the side scar glinting in the twilight like a seal of peace. "This boy speaks of sacredness," Lone Wolf sneered, "but all I see is weakness. The Comanche have grown soft as women." Yotaka shot to his feet, hand on his tomahawk. "Take those words back, Kiowa dog." "Stop," Eli shouted, but his voice was lost in the wind that had begun to blow with increasing violence. It was then that the unthinkable happened. One of the young Kiowa warriors, perhaps nervous from the tension, let fly an arrow towards the Comanche. It wasn't aimed at anyone in particular, but in the electrically charged air, that gesture was like a spark to gunpowder. Immediately, 3 Comanche arrows whizzed back in response. In the chaos that followed, as warriors leapt to their feet, brandishing weapons and shouting war cries, a stray arrow hit the most innocent target of all, Mabel. The girl had stepped out onto the porch to see what was happening when the sharpened tip struck her left arm, passing cleanly through. Her cry of pain ripped through the air like a lament of a wounded spirit. "Mabel!" Eli rushed to his sister, who had fallen to her knees, clutching her bleeding arm. The sound of that desperate cry did something miraculous. It instantly stopped the battle before it truly began. Warriors from both tribes froze, realizing what had just happened. Taki was the first to move, running to Mabel with a face devastated by guilt. "It's my fault," he whispered as he helped Eli examine her. "All this is my fault." Lone Wolf watched the scene with a changed expression. Seeing a young white woman injured in a conflict that didn't concern her touched something deep even in his war-hardened heart. If this story is moving you as much as it's moving us, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss how this dramatic moment resolves. Peace between the two worlds hangs by a thread as thin as a spiderweb in the wind. "Who shot the first arrow?" Yotaka asked, his voice trembling with anger, but also something else. Shame. A young Kiowa, no more than 18, stepped forward, head bowed. I didn't mean to. I was nervous." Eli was tearing his shirt to bandage Mabel's arm when he looked up at the warriors. There was no anger in his gaze, only a deep sadness that weighed more than any reproach. "Look," he said slowly. "Look what happened to the peace we were building." The wind blew harder and harder, sending dust and dry leaves flying. The dream catcher hanging at the window swung violently, as if trying to catch all the shattered dreams of that evening. Lone Wolf dismounted and approached slowly. "White girl," he said in broken English. I am sorry." Mabel, pale with pain but still conscious, looked him in the eyes. "It wasn't your fault," she whispered. "It was fear." Those simple words had the effect of an earthquake on the hearts present. Yotaka turned to his warriors, his face contorted with shame. "Gather your weapons," he ordered. "Let's return to camp." But as the warriors began to prepare to leave, the wind carried a sound that made everyone's blood run cold, the pounding of many hooves approaching rapidly. The settlers were coming. The rumble of hooves grew louder. Silas Brewster led 12 armed settlers, all their faces hardened by fear. "Turner!" he yelled, reining in his horse. "We heard the shots. I knew it." He stopped short when he saw Mabel sitting on the steps with her arm bandaged. "What happened to your sister?" Tom Fletcher asked, dismounting with his rifle in hand. "An accident," Eli replied. "But the situation's under control." "Under control?" Silas looked at the warriors of the two tribes. "I see Comanche and Kiowa, your sister hurt, and you say everything's under control?" Yotaka stepped forward, his hand on his tomahawk. "Who are these armed men coming here?" "They're our neighbors," Eli said quickly, "and they're about to leave." "No, Eli," Silas retorted. "This time you've gone too far. Look at your sister. Is this the price of your peace?" The night wind carried the smell of the storm. Silent lightning flashed on the horizon, casting dancing shadows on tense faces. Lone Wolf spoke suddenly. "White man, the girl was wounded by mistake. No one meant her harm. And I'm supposed to believe you, savage?" Silas spat. The insult landed like a slap. All the warriors stiffened. For a moment, tribal rivalries seemed set aside to face the common insult. "Silas, that's enough," Eli said with a warning in his voice. "No, we're tired of living in fear because of your experiments." Mabel slowly stood, supporting herself on the railing. Her movement drew everyone's attention. "Stop," she said in a clear voice despite the pain. "All of you, stop." The wind suddenly quieted. "I'm 16, and I've seen more hate than anyone should. Tonight I was wounded by mistake. But do you know what hurts me most? To see my blood used as an excuse to shed more." Taki stepped forward, eyes shining. "Mabel's right. The blood spilled should teach us, not divide us." "Fine words," Jake Morrison said. "But what happens next time?" It was Lone Wolf who answered. "Next time, we Kiowa will remember there's a place where a white girl spoke of peace while bleeding for our foolishness." The warrior approached Mabel, pulled out a small decorated knife, and laid it at her feet. "This was my father's. It's for you as a sign of respect." Yotaka took a necklace of bear claws from his neck. "Me too. You've shown more courage than all of us warriors." The wind picked up again, carrying the smell of rain that cleanses the air. The symbolic gifts at Mabel's feet seemed to gleam in the approaching lightning flashes. Lone Wolf's knife and Yotaka's necklace lay on the dust like seeds of a possible peace. But Silas's expression remained hard as granite. "Nice gestures," the settler said with sarcasm, "but they changed nothing. Tomorrow morning I want all Indians out of this valley. All of them." "You can't decide that," Eli retorted, feeling anger rise in his chest. "Oh yes, I can. I've already sent a messenger to town. Judge Hartwell will arrive the day after tomorrow with an army detachment. He'll say this land is too dangerous to be neutral territory." The wind brought the first raindrops which fell on the dust, creating small, dark craters. Taki reluctantly looked towards the horizon, where he knew Big Crow was waiting for news. "My father will never allow the army to profane the sacred trails," he said slowly. "Then there'll be war," Silas replied with cruel satisfaction. "And it'll be your fault." Lone Wolf stood up, his face hardened again. "If the army comes, the Kiowa will fight alongside the Comanche. This girl has taught us honor. And my warriors will do the same," Yotaka added, surprising everyone. "I won't let pride destroy what we've seen tonight." The rain began to fall harder, drenching everyone's hair and clothes. Mabel, despite the pain in her arm, stood and gathered the two gifts, holding them tight to her chest. "There's another way," she said suddenly, her voice barely audible above the sound of the rain. "Eli, remember the story Grandma used to tell me? The one about the woman who stopped two armies with a single word?" Eli looked at her, perplexed. "Mabel, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking maybe the answer isn't in strength, but in truth." She looked Silas straight in the eye. "You say we're dangerous. I say we're proof that peace is possible. When the judge arrives, we'll show him both sides and let him decide." "A wounded little girl dreaming of peace," Silas sneered. "Judge Hartwell laughs at such sentimentality." "Then maybe it's time someone reminded him what true justice is," Mabel retorted, surprising everyone with the firmness in her voice. Taki approached her through the pouring rain. "Are you sure? The judge might decide against us." "He might," Mabel admitted, "but at least we'd have tried without shedding more blood." The wind carried a familiar sound, the gallop of a single horse approaching through the storm. Everyone turned, and from the darkness emerged a majestic figure everyone recognized immediately. Big Crow rode towards them through the pouring rain, alone and unarmed. When he reached the group, he dismounted with the dignity of a king, water dripping from his feathers and gray hair. "I heard my son is in danger," he said simply, "and I heard the white girl was wounded on my neutral land." He looked at Mabel, noticing her bandaged arm and the gifts she held tight to her chest. Then his eyes fell on Lone Wolf and Yotaka, who stood side by side despite being enemies for generations. "Tell me," Big Crow said, "what happened here tonight?" And as the rain continued to fall, washing away the dust and anger of the day, everyone understood that what would happen in the next few minutes would forever change the valley's destiny. The rain kept falling like tears from the sky as Big Crow listened in silence to the account of that dramatic night. Taki spoke of the planned meeting, Yotaka of the arrow shot from nervousness, Lone Wolf of the mistake that had wounded Mabel. Every word fell into the air like a confession. When the telling ended, the great Comanche chief stood motionless in the pouring rain, his eyes closed as if consulting the spirits of his ancestors. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and wild sage. "Daughter of the brother of honor," he finally said, turning to Mabel, "show me what you hold in your hands." Mabel opened her palms, revealing the decorated knife and the claw necklace. Water streamed over the metals and bones, making them gleam in the lightning's light. Big Crow nodded slowly. "I see here the gifts of two enemies who chose honor over pride." He looked at Lone Wolf and Yotaka. "You two have done something I didn't even believe possible." "What, father?" Taki asked. "You have turned a mistake into wisdom. You have let innocent blood teach you instead of blind you." Silas spat into the muddy dust. "Fine words, Chief, but they don't change the fact that the army's coming tomorrow. And when they're here, all this peace will end in blood." Big Crow turned to the settler, and for a moment his eyes were hard as obsidian. "You call the army onto land I have declared sacred. Do you know what this means?" "It means we'll finally have order in this valley," Silas retorted. But his voice betrayed a note of uncertainty. "It means war," Big Crow said simply. "War that will involve every tribe from the Rocky Mountains to the Rio Grande. The blood that flows will stain the earth for years." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain on roofs and on the earth. Even the most resolute settlers began to look at Silas with different eyes, realizing the implications of his actions. "There's another way," Mabel said suddenly, stepping forward despite the pain in her arm. "Tomorrow, when the judge arrives, we'll show him this." She held up the dream catcher she'd brought from the house, now wet from the rain but still intact. The interwoven threads gleamed in the lightning's light, and the white feathers swayed gently in the wind. "What's an Indian toy supposed to prove?" Tom Fletcher asked. "It should prove that here two worlds have learned to live together," Mabel replied. "Taki made this for me, with herbs that grow on this land and feathers from the sky that covers us all. It's made from pieces of both our worlds." Big Crow approached and looked at the dreamcatcher carefully. "Your son used the valley's sacred herbs," he said to Eli. "Only those who truly respect this land can recognize them." "So what?" Jake Morrison asked. "Then," Big Crow said, raising his voice so everyone could hear above the storm, "I propose this. Tomorrow, when your judge arrives, I will be here with the chiefs of all allied tribes, not as enemies but as witnesses. Let this man of law see with his own eyes what we have built here." Lone Wolf nodded. "The Kiowa will be here. And the young Comanche warriors too," Yotaka added. "I won't let pride destroy what we've seen tonight." Silas looked at the faces around him, realizing he was isolated in his thirst for revenge. "Judge Hartwell won't be swayed by these stories," he said, but his voice had lost its former confidence. "Maybe not," Eli admitted, "but at least we'll give him the chance to choose between war and peace. And you, Silas, will have to look him in the eye and tell him you prefer blood to hope." Dawn arrived clear and fresh after the night's storm. The wind had swept away the clouds, leaving an intense blue sky that looked freshly washed. Eli woke early, anxiety gripping his stomach like a vice. Today Judge Hartwell would arrive, and with him, the valley's fate. Mabel was already up, sitting on the porch with her arm bandaged and the dreamcatcher hanging beside her. Despite the pain, her eyes shone with a determination Eli had never seen in her before. "How do you feel, little one?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Like today's the most important day of my life," she replied, looking towards the horizon where the first mounted figures began to appear. Big Crow had kept his word. Along the ancient trails came representatives of all the region's tribes: Comanche, Kiowa, Apache, even some Cheyenne from the northern plains. It was a sight no white man had ever seen. Traditional enemies riding side by side towards a common goal. Taki had stayed at the farm all night, sleeping in the barn. Now he approached the Turner siblings with uncertain steps. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked Mabel. "Once the judge hears everything, there'll be no turning back." "I don't want to go back," she replied firmly. "I want to go forward." The sound of a bugle echoed from the eastern hill. The army detachment was arriving with Judge Hartwell at its head. He was a stout man in his 50s, with a gray beard and the cold eyes of one who had seen too much of humanity's dark side. When he saw the expanse of Indian warriors arranged in a semicircle around the farm, his hand moved instinctively to his pistol. "What in tarnation is going on here?" he yelled, dismounting. Silas stepped forward at once. "Judge Hartwell, here's the proof of what I told you. Eli Turner has turned his farm into a den of savages. Look how many there are." The judge quickly counted. Over 100 warriors from different tribes, all armed but strangely quiet. "Turner," he said in a hard voice, "I've received reports that you're violating federal treaties by hosting gatherings of hostile Indians." "Not hostile, Your Honor," Eli replied, standing. "Peaceful." "Peaceful?" The judge pointed to the warriors. "I see enough weapons here to wipe out a town." It was then that Mabel stood, holding the dream catcher with her good hand. Her movement drew everyone's attention, and a deep silence fell over the valley. "Judge Hartwell," she said in a clear voice that carried on the wind to everyone present, "I am Mabel Turner. Last night I was wounded by an Indian arrow." The judge looked at her carefully, noticing her bandaged arm. "And that's supposed to convince me they're peaceful?" "No," Mabel replied. "This should convince you that hate only breeds more hate, but the choice to forgive can breed something new." She walked slowly to the judge, holding the dream catcher high. "The boy who felt responsible for my injury made this for me. It's made of herbs from this land and feathers from our very own sky. Look how it's woven. Every thread supports the others." Big Crow stepped forward. "Judge of the white man," he said in perfect English, "I am Big Crow of the Comanche. These are my allies, and this," he indicated Eli, "is my brother of honor. If you want war, you can have it. But if you want to see what happens when two peoples choose to trust one another, look at this valley." The wind blew gently, swaying the dream catcher in Mabel's hands and carrying the scent of wildflowers that grew along the ancient trails. Judge Hartwell looked at the scene before him. A wounded girl speaking of forgiveness, enemy warriors standing side by side, a settler who had chosen peace over fear. "Interesting," he murmured, and everyone held their breath. Judge Hartwell walked slowly among the groups of warriors, observing every detail with keen eyes. The soldiers in his detachment remained tense, hands near their weapons, but he raised a hand to keep them calm. "In 30 years of service," he finally said, "I've never seen Comanche and Kiowa stand this close without shedding blood." He stopped before Lone Wolf. "You are the famed war chief of the Kiowa." "I am," Lone Wolf replied with pride. "And you," he addressed Yotica, "you're one of the young Comanche warriors I've heard about." "Yes. Yet here you are together, on a white man's land, without fighting. Why?" Yotica looked at Mabel, then at the dream catcher she still held. "Because last night we learned that true courage isn't in killing, but in recognizing one's own mistakes." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "And you," he said, turning to the soldiers, "have you seen any signs of aggression from these warriors?" The sergeant, a hard-faced man, shook his head. "No, Your Honor. They're armed, but they've made no threatening gestures. In fact, some even lowered their lances when we arrived." Silas stepped forward, his face red with frustration. "Judge, don't be fooled by this show. They're savages. Yesterday they wounded the girl." "By mistake," Mabel said firmly. "And the one who shot that arrow has now given me this as a sign of respect." She showed him Lone Wolf's decorated knife. The judge took the weapon, examining it carefully. "This is a ceremonial knife. It's worth more than a horse to a Kiowa warrior." He looked at Lone Wolf. "Why did you give away something so precious?" "Because I saw a girl speak of peace while bleeding because of me," the warrior replied. "That has taught me more than any battle." The wind blew harder, swaying the feathers in the dream catcher and carrying the sound of hooves in the distance. A lone horse was approaching quickly. The rider was a young soldier, covered in dust and clearly exhausted. He dismounted unsteadily and made his way to the judge. "Judge Hartwell," he gasped. "Urgent message from Fort Stevens." The judge took the dispatch and read it quickly. His face grew grim. "What does it say?" Eli asked. "The Northern Cheyenne have attacked 3 farms near Denver," the judge replied slowly. "The Army needs all available men. I must leave immediately." A murmur of tension rippled through the warriors present. The Cheyenne attacks meant that peace in the region was more fragile than it seemed. "This changes everything," Silas said with malicious satisfaction. "See, you can never trust Indians." But Big Crow stepped forward, his voice firm and clear. "Judge of the white man, the Cheyenne who attacked are not our allies. They are desperate warriors who refuse peace. If you want the attacks to end, you need tribes like ours who choose cooperation instead of war." The judge looked at the Comanche chief, then the gathered warriors, then back at Mabel with her dream catcher. "You're right," he finally said. "I can't fight a war on 2 fronts." He turned to Eli. "Turner, your farm remains neutral territory, but under one condition." "What's that?" Eli asked. "That you agree to officially become a mediator between the tribes and the federal government. If this experiment works here, it could work elsewhere." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the wind softly singing through the dream catcher's threads. Eli looked at his sister, then Taki, then all the faces around him. "I accept," he said simply. Big Crow smiled for the first time since he had arrived. "Then the ancient trails will remain open, and new paths of peace can be born." 2 weeks after Judge Hartwell's decision, Eli's farm had become something unique, a place where the future seemed possible. The ancient trails bustled with peaceful activity. Comanche warriors taught settlers how to find water, while farmers showed new cultivation techniques. Mabel had healed completely, the scar on her arm now a symbol of pride. The dream catcher hung from the window, catching the morning light and casting interwoven shadows on the walls. "Taki," she said one morning, "have you ever thought that a mistake could become the most beautiful gift?" The young Comanche, now Eli's assistant, smiled. "My grandmother used to say that the spirits weave destiny with threads of joy and sorrow. Perhaps they used an arrow as a needle." That morning, Silas Brewster arrived. He dismounted slowly, his face marked by shame. "Eli, I need to talk to you." They sat under the big oak. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers. "I got a letter," he began, pulling out crumpled paper. "From my brother-in-law in Denver. The Cheyenne attacked again, but the Comanche allied with the government stopped them. They saved a family." Eli nodded. "Big Crow sent his best warriors." "Yeah, and one of them died protecting a little girl the same age as Mabel." The silence lengthened, heavy with meaning. Silas looked up. "I was wrong, Eli. The pain for my brother blinded me. What you've built here is what ought to be everywhere." Taki approached from the barn. Silas looked at him, then stood and extended his hand. "Son, I'm sorry for how I treated you." Taki gripped his hand without hesitation. "The past is like the wind that's gone. What matters is the breath we're taking now." Mabel came out with fresh lemonade. Seeing the scene, she smiled. "Mr. Brewster, would you like to stay for lunch? Taki's teaching me Comanche cornbread." Silas looked at the girl, her scar barely visible, the dream catcher at the window, and something melted in his heart. "I'd like that very much." That evening at sundown, 4 people sat on the porch. The wind carried the sounds of the valley in peace, horses whinnying, birds singing, voices of warriors and settlers working together. "Eli," Mabel said, looking at the horizon, "do you think we'll manage to build a world where everyone can live together?" Eli looked at the dream catcher swaying in the breeze, its threads catching the last rays of sun. "I don't know, little one. But I know we've started something important. And sometimes, starting is all it takes." The night wind began to blow down from the mountains, carrying the scent of sage and the rising stars. A year had passed since that stormy night that changed everything. Autumn painted the valley in gold and copper, and the wind carried the sweet smell of dry grass and falling leaves. Eli was mending a fence when he saw a wagon train approaching along the ancient trails. Not warriors this time, but families. Men, women, and children from different tribes coming to settle in the valley, drawn by the stories of peace that had spread like seeds on the wind. "Brother of honor," Big Crow dismounted with a smile Eli had never seen on him before. "Come see what the newcomers have brought." He followed the Comanche chief to the center of the valley, where something extraordinary had arisen. A mixed village where colorful teepees stood alongside small wooden houses, where Indian and white children played together, running between the dwellings. At the center of the village, on a tall, decorated pole, waved a large dream catcher made of woven branches and feathers from all the region's tribes. It had become the valley's symbol, visible from afar like a beacon of hope. "They all made it together," Taki explained, now a wise and respected young man. "Every family contributed something, a thread, a feather, a prayer." Mabel approached, holding the hand of a Kiowa child who had learned to call her sister. The scar on her arm was now faded, but her eyes shone with a wisdom beyond her 17 years. "Eli," she said softly, "remember when you asked me if we'd truly managed to build a world where everyone can live together?" Eli looked around. He saw Silas Brewster teaching a group of young warriors how to repair wagon wheels. He saw Lone Wolf sharing a fire with a family of newly arrived German settlers. He saw Taki's old dream catcher still hanging from their house window, now joined by dozens of others created by the village children. "Yes," he replied. His voice moved. "I believe we have." The autumn wind blew harder, making all the dream catchers in the village dance in a silent symphony. The feathers swayed like small flags of peace, and the interwoven threads gleamed in the golden light of dusk. Big Crow approached Eli, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The prophecy of my people spoke of a white man who would open the land of reconciliation. But now I know you are not the man of the prophecy." "No?" Eli asked, surprised. "No. You are something more important. You are the man who showed that the prophecy wasn't needed, that peace needs no magic, only brave hearts and open doors." As the first stars appeared in the autumn's purple sky, all the village families gathered around the large central bonfire. There were no longer Comanche, Kiowa, Apache, or white folk. There were just people who had chosen to build something new together. Taki took his guitar and began to play a melody that blended the traditions of all the valley's peoples. The wind carried that music far over the hills, towards other places where perhaps someone was still choosing between hate and hope. And along the ancient trails now walked by laughing children and adults working side by side, a new wind blew. The wind of change, of possible peace, of the future that had already begun. This story of courage and reconciliation has ended, but the message lives on. If it's touched your heart like it's touched ours, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Maybe you too, like Eli, are building a bridge between different worlds.